Good morning. My name is Georgia Turner, and I am the Director of Strategic Accounts at MindBridge, and I'm going to be your host today. Now, MindBridge is the world's leading AI risk assurance discovery platform. Today, we have a very special guest joining us, Danielle Supkis Cheek. And for the next 10 minutes, we will be discussing next gen technology, ethics, and independence. Now, Danielle is the immediate past TIC chair, IT Service Task Force for Peak members, US Rep for IFAC, SMPAG, and she is on the CPA Evolution Model Curriculum Committee. In addition to, we are lucky to have her here at MindBridge as our AI Vice President of Industry Relations. Now, good morning, Danielle.
Good morning, Georgia. Good to be here.
Excellent. Now, to kick things off, a theme in the world of artificial intelligence is the responsible and ethical development of AI. Are there any special considerations for auditors using high tech?
Of course there are. So everything is, as all the auditors watching know, everything is more complicated as the auditor. The big kind of key core tenet is that the general rule is that as a CPA, you can never subordinate your judgment to others. I mean, that's really early on in the ethics standards, and that includes machines. So that includes the concepts of AI. But when you layer on independence, this gets infinitely more complicated for an auditor trying to navigate the change management.
Now, how so?
Well, okay, so we've promised lightning round, so I'll be short and brief on this, but I could go on for hours about this topic, and honestly, there are sessions that we can get into on this, but there's really two core areas that are kind of the trickiest parts that really to watch out for when you're looking at assessing technology for can you use it for ethics and independence reasons. The first is, number one, where the data lives is of paramount importance. On the US side, there's an hosting interpretation that pretty much says that the auditor cannot be the gatekeeper to the client's data. It kind of violates the concept of the management responsibility. And even still, portals become a problem in that place. So having the auditor have a way to not be the hosts of data throughout the entire process is really important. And looking at a lot of cloud providers ends up making it very easy to kind of not bypass the rules, but work yourself through the rules and make it not so complicated because you're not the gatekeeper of the data. And it's really about the primary source of data, but you can accidentally trip into some of these rules related to hosting of data during your audit procedures. The second one is really who develops the technology. So a lot of firms do develop in-house. A lot of firms actually, buy software out of the box. But the issue is not the audit service itself on this one. This one is about the non-attest services that sometimes can be a byproduct of the audit. So for example, developing and preparing financial statements is defined as a non-attest service. That happened in SARS 21, excuse me. And so that means the aggregation of the financial statements and anything else that kind of has that feedback loop that is being done as a byproduct of the audit, your audit software can kind of trip you up a little bit if you are not paying attention to these kinds of rules. So one of the issues is that you could have it be the case, so it's not always the case, but if you are not paying attention, your audit system could jump into the rules for financial information systems. Now, that's not the ending of your audit and you've impaired your independence, so it's not that scary, but you do have to go through extra layers of assessment. And anytime you build yourself, you have more threats because you are in effect potentially relying upon yourself on that non-attest service. So the more often that you use out of the box tools, the more outs that you have in the standards to be able to navigate the standards more effectively. And it gets really sometimes tricky when you're looking at some of those kind of hybrid tools.
All right. Well, I guess on that note, what about some of those cool reports that are coming off audit systems and tools these days? Does that fall into the same risk as prepared financial statements?
They could. It is a non-attest service that's coming off, but if its primary use is the audit, then you're actually okay. Like it's fine to use all the cool reports internally to your audit. It's once you start sharing to the client that it starts becoming the risk. And again, if you build it yourself, if you get the feedback loop. So the feedback loop exists today already. So let's say you have an audit adjustment that needs to happen. Let's just do something really basic on like a lease calculation on a just good old fashioned before the new lease standard, 842, the new before an 842, so the 840 lease standard, and you need to do a capital lease. And somebody doesn't do the capital lease correctly, and you put together your little work paper template to assess capital lease and figure out how to get it recorded. And then you give that to the client to get that recorded. And then, 2 years down the line, they have their next capital lease, and all of a sudden, you are seeing your audit work paper as the assessment for how did they do that capital lease. So that is the risk that you have already internal to the audit. So this is nothing that hasn't existed already. But what happens is technology and being able to do this at scale, you have to think about these things a little bit earlier on the process of what do you use. So the more that you use external tools, the more you're able to reduce your threats to independence because you don't have the same risk of auditing your own work. You're assessing the use of somebody else's tool and making sure that you can rely upon that tool and making sure it's doing what's intended. So those cool reports can possibly be completely fine to send to your auditors, especially if you're using a third-party system. If you start building your own, let's call it Power BI dashboards, and start using like DAX as the code in Power BI, you can build some really great things internal, but if it comes back to you and you start having management make decisions on that and you get that feedback loop, you actually have a greater threat to independence impairments.
Gotcha. Now, how do you assess where the line is?
It's a toughie to try to assess that line. Really, it's going to come down to facts and circumstances, and it's going to change based on each scenario. So the breaking news that most people don't know about because the meeting minutes haven't been posted, but if you attended the peak session recently, that they are planning to defer the IT services interpretation to 1/1/23 instead of 1/1/22. That's going to be a big deal because that's where you get some of the really more specific guidance coming out in the related FAQs. But it's still a good idea to take a look at that now. Make sure your work now isn't going to impair you a year from now. So I'd say looking at that, and then going back to your good old-fashioned threats and safeguards and really spend some time of thinking what could happen and go through those threats and safeguards concepts.
Is there anything that firms should be doing now?
I would say looking at all your vendors and seeing what you're using and what do you rely upon and what do you need to make sure is okay. So, for example, later this month, IESBA, which is the International Ethics Group, is working on a technology ethics project. The exposure draft is expected at some point this month. We'll see when that is, hopefully before the holidays. They come up with a fairly elegant approach, actually. They're planning on you need to assess your technology similar to the way you would assess the use of an expert. That's a pretty elegant way because it really shows that the technology is not replacing the humans. It's just supplementing and automating certain pieces of the human so that they can then do a more effective job and have a tool that they've never had or the ability to aggregate as much information that they've never had before. So if you think of, okay, we're using it the same way you'd assess a chemical engineer that you need on the engagement, do the same thing for your technology. I think it's going to become on the vendors to prove that they have the ability to be relied upon. We happen to be already writing up some work paper templates for firms so that they know that you can rely on your technology and that it's been vetted in some meaningful way. So hopefully that post later this month, check out my either LinkedIn or Twitter, something like that, either for myself or the organization, and we'll be posting that when it comes out.
Perfect. Danielle, thank you so much for joining us for our lightning session today. It's been great to hear from you. And I know we'll be hearing from you in the future. We have our review in a day session coming up here on the 16th. So looking forward to learning more. Thank you so much.
See you then. Bye.
Bye.